Jeffrey Epstein, who just committed suicide. He was a friend of Christina's when she was a Victoria's Secret model. Jeffrey was friendly with that crowd, and everyone with Alan Dershowitz and Bill Clinton, and everyone kind of flew on Jeffrey's plane. And we all know that Jeffrey was out of balance in the ways that he was, and we have zero tolerance for the things that Jeffrey did wrong. And yet, let's also own what the world did. The world took Jeffrey Epstein, if you guys followed this story, and they demonized him. They made him into the worst, most horrific devil in the world, not because there was a sense of moral outrage. Yes, he did obvious things that were wildly out of balance, but because it stole newspapers.
Hello, my juicy peaches. Welcome back to my channel. It is your priestess Peaches here, supporting you to live your juiciest life and co-create heaven on earth. Today's video is a part 3. I think I'm on part 3 of a series about Marc Gafni, who is Aubrey Marcus's love doctor, and now we have established a connection with Jeffrey Epstein here as well. And I was watching the Awakening Conversations podcast about all of this, and that's where I've taken the clips from. Just so you know, I am not technically minded at all. I've literally just filmed my screen whilst I was watching the clips because I have no idea how to edit all these things together. So please excuse the poor quality of my editing skills. Before I get into this video, I just want to say that this video is for entertainment and educational purposes only. I just want to say a trigger warning here as well, because I am going to be discussing quite difficult topics to do with SA, CSA, and some dark things that go on in this world. And so I'm just letting you know that now. So if you are sensitive, or if you're not in the space to be hearing things like this, please look after yourself. If you need a break, go and take a break. This may be a slightly longer video again, so get yourself comfortable. Please look after yourself, know your boundaries, know your limits, and really do honor that for yourself. So we're going to go on a little bit of a journey today. I started off just with some clips of Marc Gafni speaking about Jeffrey Epstein, his friend. I'm going to be sharing some clips of Marc from his own channel and also the Awakening Conversations podcast episode. And I have asked permission from the amazing, wonderful women from the Awakening Conversations podcast if I could use what they've said in their videos and clip things, and they gave me permission to do that. I do just want to say this is a triggering conversation for me, and so please do be kind in the comments and compassionate and just gentle. And if you have any opposing thoughts, I really do welcome that. Just be kind in the way that you go about it. So if you don't already know who Marc Gafni is, then I do recommend watching my other 2 videos about him, because that explains everything you need to know about Marc Gafni. Well, not everything, because there's more things that have come to light now, which I'm going to be discussing in this video. And feel free to watch my Aubrey Marcus videos as well, because this is really where everybody took notice of Marc Gafni in Aubrey Marcus's podcast about his radical monogamy situation. A lot of people who are attuned to energies, can read body language, can feel things, or have had experiences of certain types of abuse or manipulation or coercion. People got a vibe about Marc from that video. Aubrey Marcus calls Marc Gafni his relationship guru, his relationship counsel, the person that he goes to for advice around love, intimacy, pleasure, sexuality. Marc Gafni is his guide and his love doctor. As you have just heard now, Marc Gafni also calls Jeffrey Epstein his friend. And when Jeffrey Epstein passed away, Marc didn't condemn his crimes and he speaks about accountability, but he's not holding him accountable. Instead, he blames the public, he blames us for projecting our collective shadow onto Jeffrey Epstein, and apparently that is what made Epstein commit suicide, if he did commit suicide. We don't know really what happened there. So just think about this for a minute, because this is the mentality that we are dealing with here when it comes to Marc Gafni. And I am pretty sure that Jeffrey Epstein is probably of the same mentality as Marc Gafni and other people like them. And I'm going to be introducing you to some other videos of Marc throughout this video. He has videos on his own channel. He did a video about Tantra. He teaches about Tantra, but it's not real, true, authentic Tantra, what he is teaching. He is twisting spiritual concepts and spiritual truth, if you will, to fit his agenda, to absolve himself of responsibility for his wrongdoings in the past and potentially present. He is a very sneaky, slippery, slimy, manipulative person. He is a master manipulator, and I only have to listen to him for a few seconds to realize that, because I know that type of person. I have dealt with that type of person myself, and it's very obvious to me. I can see through the veil of Marc Gafni and the web of BS that he speaks. He literally talks out of his behind, okay? And but he laces it in, he weaves it in with true spiritual teachings and concepts. And so it's like 90% he speaks the actual concepts and the actual truth of that concept, and then he weaves in 10% distortion, manipulation, gaslighting, bypassing, twisting narratives, inversion tactics. It is all in there. So Marc Gafni's wife, Christina Kincaid, I have mentioned her in another video that I've done. She was a Victoria's Secrets model, and she moved in the same circles. Marc said himself, as you could hear in that clip, that she moved in the same circles as Jeffrey Epstein. These aren't just random overlaps here. They show the kind of elite connections that often sit beneath the surface of society. And it's really important that we address these issues and think about the types of people that believe the things that Marc is saying, the types of people that have been indoctrinated into these belief systems, the types of people that seek out these belief systems so that they can behave in the ways they want to behave. We need to be aware of what is going on in this world. So let's just listen to what Marc has to say in his own words about his thoughts on why everybody, quote unquote, demonized Jeffrey Epstein. He seems to think that we demonized him because of our own inner shadow that we are projecting onto him, and for views and clicks and to make money, rather than people demonizing Jeffrey Epstein because the things that he did, the choices that he made, the abuse that he committed. Rather than blaming Jeffrey, he is blaming us. So let's just have a little listen to that.
It was called Jeffrey Epstein News the last 3 weeks around the world because he was driving clicks. And if we can demonize someone and we can project all of our sexual shadow onto Jeffrey Epstein, then we're okay. So the demonization of Jeffrey Epstein was so intense that instead of being appropriately held accountable for his misdeed, he committed suicide. Right? Because we took all of our shadow and we put it on him. Right? And I just actually found out that Jeffrey committed suicide right before church. And so I'm going to be politically incorrect. We're not interested in that. Right? We're praying for our friend Jeffrey Epstein. And yes, I did just say our friend Jeffrey Epstein, who was a complex and beautiful man, right, in 1,000 different ways, and made serious mistakes and committed serious transgressions for which he needs to be held accountable. And he was filled with light. And we hold that complexity. We don't demonize. So Jeffrey, my brother, right, rest in peace. Right? May the transition, right, be beautiful. May your karma be healed, right? And may the next step, right, be unbelievable. And may we take back the sexual shadow that we've projected onto you.
So this is taking the concept of non-duality and taking it too far and spiritually bypassing people's choices to abuse, people's behaviors, and bypassing the victimization of girls and women that happened with Jeffrey Epstein. So this is Marc Gafni having more compassion, more empathy, more sympathy for a convicted sex offender. If you are somebody that believes in non-duality and that everything comes from one source and everything is light and we return to the light, which I am personally inclined to believe, this is a real manipulation of that bypasses abuse. That he speaks about accountability, he mentions accountability, but he's not holding Jeffrey accountable for his actions. He's holding the public and the public's collective shadow, apparently our collective shadow, that sexual shadow that we've projected onto Jeffrey. That's nuts, okay? That is nuts. That is like the opposite of accountability, the opposite of holding somebody responsible. And the thing is, he's saying we mustn't demonize, but what can we do when somebody is a repeat offender? They don't have remorse, they don't see what they're doing as wrong, they don't want to change. What can we do? What is the public with our collective dark sexual shadow supposed to do when somebody is a continuous repeat perpetrator and offender who isn't able to change? And honestly, I really sense here that the reason why Marc is speaking like this is because he is somebody who has perpetrated and offended, and he has much more compassion for the offender than he does victims. And this will become more apparent the further we go into this video. So I'm going to share with you now his teachings around Tantra. And as you know, I am very interested in Tantra. I have been studying and practicing Tantra for, 13 years now. And the subtle and yet not so subtle ways that he manipulates tantric concepts and philosophy. Most of the time when you listen to somebody who is manipulating you, you will feel confusion, you will feel a sense of maybe even guilt and shame, because master manipulators like this have a way of speaking that makes you feel like you've done something wrong, and you need to listen to them, and they've got the answer, and you're missing out if you don't listen to them. So just bear that in mind when you listen to what he says.
Right, but the Tantric way is first the principle of non-rejection. Nothing's off the table. Right? It's like, principle of non-rejection. That's the first major Tantric principle, which is so wildly important. Nothing's off the table. We don't make the easy distinction between sacred and profane, between light and darkness, between conventional and post-conventional. Does that make sense, everyone? Yeah, that's the first principle of Tantra. And it's the first principle, I would say, of the center.
One of the main concepts of Tantra, one of the main pieces to Tantra is the namas and niyamas, which are in yoga and Tantra, and the concept of ahimsa, which means no harm, doing no harm. And so he forgets that. So he then goes on to speak about victimhood. And it sounds to me like he doesn't believe in victimization. He doesn't believe that someone can be a victim. And he mentions, which I don't know if I've got it in this clip, about how power is distributed in complex ways. It's not as simple as what people say. And everything he's speaking about here, to me, is very, very strong victim blaming, victim shaming, and it is disguised under empowerment for victims. And like that we have power, and don't give your power to somebody else. You're not really a victim, you're giving your power away. And that's not true. So let's listen to what he has to say.
The victim is, I'm innocent. They did it to me. I had no power. So what the victim does is they kind of, first off, they cast the other person in a dynamic, right, as a predator, right, a victimizer. Then they cast themselves as victims, right? Fact patterns don't matter. Truth disappears, right? I was somehow a victim, right? My own agency, my own power is rejected. It's taken off the table. It's split off, right? How do you do that? So what you do is you hyperbolize this enormous power to the person I'm in contact with. It's like people split off their power, and then they, instead of integrating the complex, they demonize.
So he is not considering coercion, manipulation, people's positions of authority and power over others, and also age. He is not considering these things with what he is saying. He seems to think that everybody's on equal grounds, equal starting ground, or that a victim who is being victimized somehow has power that they're not realizing they have, and that it's their own fault that they are being victimized, that they are playing the victim. That is the gist of what I get from what he's saying, and I'm just sharing little clips here, but there is more to what he said. And if you watch his videos on his channel, if you look at the Awakening Conversations podcast, you'll be able to hear more of what he's speaking about. I mean, I personally am at a point where I don't want to hear his voice anymore after this video. So in the next clip, he's speaking about evil, and I haven't shown the whole clip here, but he is referring to people that leave the conversation, that don't continue a conversation. To me, it sounds like what he is saying is, if you've been victimized, you should stay in conversation with your abuser. This is a theme that comes up later as well that he speaks about. And he's speaking about people being evil because they're demonizing others. And he doesn't understand that there's levels to this. When somebody has repeatedly harmed people, sexually abused, physically abused, and perpetrated, that is a whole different kettle of fish, right? And it's like Marc can't distinguish the differences. And this is really typical of somebody who is sociopathic. It's very, very typical for them to, they actually always play the victim, and they will think of themselves as not as bad because so-and-so did this. They don't understand the levels of perpetration and abuse and criminality. That's what it seems like.
I'm always surprised by evil. I'm like, wow, right? And it has a quality. There's a certain, you don't even have to, there's a certain quality. There's a fabric. There's a way that evil feels, right? And so it comes from this non-tantric capacity. And by tantra, I mean a quality of consciousness, a quality of thought, a quality of practice that lives in every great tradition.
So he's going to speak about non-rejection again and some other things now. So let's listen to what he has to say, and I will be back to comment on it.
So the first principle is the principle of non-rejection. And so the example I gave for non-rejection, the opposite of non-rejection is demonization. Now again, I want to be clearly, I want to stay with me closely. That doesn't mean that Hitler's not a demon. Hitler was a demon. Right? Clearly. Because there are demons. But demonization means, to stay really close, demonization means where I apply demonology where it doesn't belong. That kind of demonization, when we apply it without enormous rigor, when we call people Charles Manson, whoa, we're probably projecting some deep evil in ourselves, right? That's generally when people project that kind of evil, it's probably because they feel something very dark in themselves and they're projecting it. So Tantra is the principle of non-rejection. And the first non-rejection is don't reject parts of myself. Because if I reject parts of myself, I'm going to demonize you. I'm going to project it onto you.
No, no, this isn't Tantra. This isn't what that means. And people don't just demonize other people because of their own shadow or that they've got a darkness in them. People demonize other people if they have done things that are awful, right? And the thing is, when somebody commits a crime, perpetrates, abuses, offends, they're making a choice to do that. They know the consequences, right? There is always a consequence to your actions, to your behaviors, to your choices. And we need to have consequences. I'm all for a therapeutic justice system, but we also need consequences, because sometimes the only reason somebody doesn't offend is because of the consequences. So we need those in place. There has to be a consequence to your actions. You are well aware that if you are going to behave in these horrific ways, then you are probably going to be cast out of society, demonized, put in jail, and punished for that. And yes, true justice is in healing, but unfortunately, a lot of these people who do these things are not wanting to heal. They're not wanting to heal. They don't even see what they're doing as bad or wrong because they delude themselves, like Marc here, and they take on belief systems that support their narrative and their agenda that absolves them from wrongdoing, or they just don't care. Or they just don't care that what they're doing is harmful, or they really get a kick out of it. And there's many people who they can't be helped. They don't want to be helped. So we need to have consequences. One of those consequences is to be demonized by society. If you're going to choose to do something that is awful and horrific and harmful to others, then you need to accept the consequence of that is likely you are going to be demonized. And I understand what he's saying in one sense, in that I understand this on a very, very deep level because of my own trauma and things that I've been through as a child. I understand that no one person is just their offences. The totality of a person isn't just their negative behaviours and choices and their offences. But when somebody has no remorse, when somebody isn't changing, doesn't want to change, doesn't see they need to change, then this is a very different type of person to somebody who has remorse, who wants to change, who never wants to behave like that again, and who wants to right their wrongs, okay? So if somebody can show you that, then of course there may be more understanding and compassion and ways for them to integrate back into society. But we need to consider potential victims and put victims, potential victims and survivors before perpetrators. We must, for the safety of society. So it's just crazy to me the way that he speaks about these things. And no, it's not true that if you reject parts of yourself, your shadows, that you're going to demonize others. He's convoluting two things here, and it doesn't work quite like that. And it's very tricky the way he's saying this because it seems like truth, but it's not, because he's confusing and manipulating truth into this narrative where he feels that our shadows are demonizing others, and it's our fault when we demonize someone else rather than the person's fault for the actions and behaviors and choices they have made.
Looks like they're reporting on things happening, but actually they're behind the scenes arousing the things and causing them to happen all the time in order to have an object, right, of focus where they can kind of pour their hatred or their anger, right, or their confusion, right, and they label, right, whoever they're stalking or whatever they're stalking as evil because they've actually can't find the tantric place where they can find the complexity in themselves. They can find the shadow in themselves. If I can't find the shadow in myself, I project it onto you. So the first principle of Tantra is the principle of non-rejection. I don't reject and split up parts of myself, and I don't demonize, right? Unless it's, unless we are talking about Charles Manson, right? Right? But in other words, generally it's not, it shouldn't be part of our conversation.
So he says Hitler and Charles Manson are demonic. So he obviously has a line somewhere, but Jeffrey Epstein, not demonic. Don't demonize him. So he obviously has a line somewhere that he draws, and it seems like, based on his past, he hasn't got an issue with men with younger teenage girls. He hasn't got an issue with men breaking boundaries sexually. Not rejecting those parts of yourself does not mean to condone parts of yourself if they are harmful, or to just have acceptance of it, or to bypass them. That's not what it means. Non-rejection means to fully look at yourself, fully integrate, fully heal, to really work with yourself. That's what non-rejection means. It doesn't mean, oh, I've got these really negative parts of myself and that's just part of me. It means heal those parts of yourself. Don't reject them, work with them. That's what it means. I personally feel like you can have full awareness of your shadows and still look at somebody else and think, whoa, that's sick, that's twisted, that is really harmful and disgusting and wrong. And that's not because I have anything of the same within me. That's because that is what that is. Do you know what I mean?
Right? I own that which is displeasing. I own that which is broken. I own my broken heart, and I realize there's nothing more whole than a broken heart.
Nothing more whole than a broken heart. I own that which is displeasing. So again, this feels like he's owning that which is displeasing, but he's not saying, well, we need to work on that, we need to shift that, we need to change that. He's saying, let's just own it. And him saying this awful, horrible saying, there's nothing more whole than a broken heart. I strongly, strongly disagree with that sentiment. The whole pain equals growth, sacrifice equals evolution. What kind of paradigm are you choosing to exist in when you're choosing those types of things? It's like, okay, fine, if something negative or difficult is, or challenging or painful is happening, then yes, you can find the growth in that. You can find the silver linings. You can find empowerment through it. But you don't need to go around purposely trying to break yourself or others to evolve and to grow. It's like, yeah, if it happens naturally, then yes, there's ways you can look at it that are really empowering and positive to help you through that. But that doesn't mean that we need to go around purposely trying to make that happen, because that's unnatural to do that. It's not in the flow of things. Do you know what I mean? It's like purposely trying to cause breakage in order to grow. It is one way of growing, I guess, but it can be very dangerous, very destructive, very harmful, and very traumatizing. And when that is happening over a prolonged period of time, yeah, it can really cause a lot of problems for people if that's their only approach in life, or their philosophy is, I need to experience pain in order to grow. If that's the only belief system that you're buying into, then you're not gonna have, it's gonna be a really challenging, difficult, painful life. And it doesn't have to be that way. Like, you do not have to always grow in that way. You do not have to break in order to break through. You really don't. There are other ways. And I personally, I just feel like, ew, no, not for me, thank you. Like, if it happens, then yeah, I will utilize it for my benefit if there is painful stuff going on. But I'm not going to try and make that happen, because that to me is, it just feels abusive. It feels abusive. It feels self-abusive. And I'm not here for that.
Often a person who attacks, right, who hasn't experienced the principle of, of non-rejection, so they've split off parts of themselves, right? They've split off their own aliveness. They can't actually feel their own aliveness, so they can only feel their own aliveness by attacking someone else. Does that make sense? To demonize you because I did something that was betraying. All right, I somehow became Judas. I somehow betrayed. And by Judas, I don't mean, I mean that as a literary metaphor. I somehow betrayed. I can't own my own betrayal. So I find something that either I say you did wrong or you did do wrong. Maybe you did, right? Often we do things wrong. We make mistakes. But instead of talking to you about it, I demonize you. I refuse to have a conversation, right? And then what I do is, like demonizers always do, I amplify, I distort, I exaggerate, and then I deny. I deny the deeper context, the deeper goodness, the deeper love, the deeper eros, the deeper integrity, the deeper kindness, right? If thousands of conversations disappear, I demonize. So that's a big deal. Polarization means there's no conversation. Potency, power, means I can have a conversation. Now, the reason people don't have conversations is because, wow, it's too painful. Why is it too painful? Because I won't be able to own my own power, or because, and what we do is we then paint the other person, I don't know, I'll just use this image, as Palpatine, right? Right? They have, occult powers, I can't talk to them. Whoa, relax. stop infantilizing. Have a conversation. Have a mediated conversation. Great. Make yourself safe. If you don't feel safe, make yourself safe, right? Everyone likes to talk about how they're unsafe. The big thing in the world today is I'm unsafe.
He seems to think that if somebody doesn't have a face-to-face conversation with them, that they are, if they're speaking about him or Jeffrey Epstein or Aubrey Marcus or whoever, that they are just demonizing them and projecting their shadow on them, and that they don't have any concept of their own inner shadows or darkness, and that they shouldn't be giving him so much power or be afraid to speak to him face to face or have a face-to-face conversation. But what I want to say here is that with people like Marc Gafni, who I believe is a sociopath, I'm just going to put that out there. I believe he is a sociopath. I believe he has narcissistic sociopathic traits. And for me personally, and from what I know to be true about that kind of person, my power is in having a boundary around not speaking to those kind of people face to face. What I know to be true about these kind of people is that it's really important to have a very strong boundary and be empowered and keep your power, take your power back by not having face-to-face conversations with these kind of people. That is the best way to be empowered and to have that boundary. And we are allowed that boundary, especially the victims of Marc Gafni and the women who have spoken up and out about him. It's really important for them to not speak to him directly. And he knows that he is a master manipulator. He knows that if he speaks to these people directly, then he's got a better chance of manipulating, right? And so the best thing you can do with people like this is to not speak to them. Don't speak to them face to face. Don't give them the satisfaction. He doesn't deserve our time and energy, I'm afraid. He doesn't deserve a face-to-face conversation. I'm not going to speak to a known master manipulator. I'm not going to speak to, I mean, obviously I can't speak to Jeffrey Epstein now, but I'm not going to speak to a convicted predator, perpetrator, and sex offender. Why on earth would we give our time to people like that? No. Instead, I'm going to share and speak about these things publicly and open up the conversation because it really matters, and it's really important for us to understand the mentality of these kind of people, because these kind of people infiltrate in society and they get to positions of power, control, authority. They have money and therefore they have influence. And so it's important to understand how their brains are working. Just to have that awareness, I find really empowering, and I want to speak about these things so that we can find solutions to the abuse that goes on in this world. It is so manipulative of him, what he's saying. Your power is in your boundary. So that's all I need to say here. Like, he's talking out of his hole, quite frankly, and no, you don't need to sit down and have a face-to-face conversation with somebody like that. And yeah, he's trying to say this in the way of like, be empowered, don't give your power away, to try and get people to have face-to-face conversations with him so he can get his claws in again. And that's very sneaky. So you don't need to do that. Your power is in your boundaries. Yeah, make yourself safe. Don't talk to people like that. End of. You don't have to put yourself in a position to be face to face with somebody who is a slippery, sneaky character, who is deluding themselves continuously, and who, yeah, you don't have to be in the same room as somebody like that. Keep yourself safe by having a boundary.
The demarcating characteristic of an anti-tantric position is I won't have a conversation. I'll demonize. I'll lash out.
That is complete lies. It is not anti-tantric to choose to have a boundary and to not have a conversation with somebody. That's nuts. What he's saying is nuts.
My dear friend Aubrey Marcus just did a podcast that I participated in. And for the people you may have liked or not liked, but it was basically about a person who, wanted to live honestly and wanted to kind of create a new configuration of intimacy, had a huge, and oh my God, right? And of course, then I think there must have been 50 podcasts made about that podcast, right? Because people were then trying to attract attention. Let's use this turbocharged algorithm to make a podcast where I can now attract attention to myself and engage in more demonization. Like, whoa, slow down, everybody. Slow down, right? We have to be willing to have conversations. Common threads are either pseudo-eros or anti-eros. They're not conversations. Conversations is where we hold each other. We sit face to face, or again, we're in mediated context. We examine information. We look for the good in each other. We search for the daemon, not the demon. We realize that actually we're willing to be displeasing to ourselves. We're willing to transform. We're willing to grow. We're willing to deepen. We're willing to become more. The Tantric principle is the principle of non-rejection. It's so deep. It's so deep. It's so deep.
I said this in my other video, a letter to Aubrey Marcus, because Aubrey has seriously been influenced by Marc here, and you can really tell because this is where it comes from. It comes from Marc Gafni saying, oh, everyone's demonizing you, which is so strange to me because that is him playing the victim. So he's all about don't play the victim, don't give people your power. Well, if you're saying that Aubrey is being demonized, then you're basically saying that he's a victim of demonization. But if we're going to use your own concepts here, Marc Gafni, then yeah, you're victimizing yourself and Aubrey, aren't you really, by saying, yeah. And I said in my letter to Aubrey that, okay, fair enough, there probably are some haters out there. There probably are some people out there who are in a really negative way using the situation to be mean and to be bullies and things like that, which isn't cool. That's not cool. The public has a right to have freedom of speech and share our opinions and perspectives on important and relevant topics. We have a right to do that. And for me personally, like I said, I've got a very small YouTube channel that's not even monetized. I'm not expecting anything from it. I just felt called to share about it. Same goes right now. Not everybody is doing it for those reasons. But even if somebody is doing it for views and for clicks and to help grow their channel, there's nothing wrong with that. And I feel like if you're in integrity with what it is you're speaking about and you feel like it's important to speak about and it happens to grow your channel, then great. What is wrong with that? There's nothing wrong with that. And it's really hypocritical as well because Aubrey Marcus speaks about other people on his channel as well sometimes. So, that's just the way the world goes round. We are all interdependent beings, and it's okay to speak about things that you feel called to speak about. And it's okay if those things are popular, relevant topics. It doesn't mean that you are just mindlessly, in a nasty way, using vampire-ish, using them for clickbait or things like that. And even if you are, as long as you know what you're saying is in integrity and you genuinely feel called to share about it, then there's nothing wrong with that. So don't let this man, he's trying to silence people. That's what this is. He's trying to stop people from this snowballing thing that's happening because, yeah, he knows that people are talking about him, talking about Aubrey, and this is just a way to try and silence people so that he can carry on doing what he's doing and get away with it. Okay, I'm going to read you my notes here and then we're going to move on to the next bit, which is all about why is Marc Gafni speaking about these things? What are his beliefs? What is he spouting on about? And why? Why is he the way he is? Why has he done the things he's done? Why is he how can he just somehow work his way up into spiritual communities and religious communities and infiltrate and influence? How has he become so close with Aubrey Marcus? Why is Aubrey listening to this man and allowing him to influence his relationship and basically destroy it? Why is he saying all these things? I just want to touch on everything that was just said, just to reiterate. So I'm going to read my notes. One of Marc's favorite concepts is to use the tantric concept of non-rejection, non-duality, no demonization, and the idea that everything is sacred, that light and dark come from the same source. He loves to utilize that concept and twist it to his narrative and agenda. In authentic Tantra, non-duality means that everything comes from one source, but it is also rooted in ahimsa, no harm, and the yamas and niyamas, which are your virtues and ethics, and ashtanga, which is the 8 limbs of yoga. But he uses these concepts to bypass responsibility, gaslight victims, have more compassion for perpetrators than victims. Non-rejection is about conscious integration, not indulgence, and he twists spiritual truths to suit his narrative. Marc takes the first part of non-rejection and Tantra, but he discards the rest. He turns everything is sacred into nothing is wrong, and that's not enlightenment. And then he frames walking away from an abuser and having boundaries as demonization and as evil. And he says it's evil to stop the conversation. That is not healing. That is really lacking compassion. That is a form of grooming and coercion and manipulation tactics. And it is also victim blaming and shaming. So this is the next point. He packages victim blaming as empowerment. So he sneakily packages victim blaming as empowerment and personal power. You're only powerless if you think you are. Power is always in both people in any given situation. And yes, healing means reclaiming your power after harm, but in the moment of abuse, the victim has no power, okay? There is such a thing as coercion, manipulation, coercive control, and especially with children, young adults, and especially when somebody is in a position of authority, there is no equal power dynamics here. So this is completely untrue. Marc erases that truth because it absolves perpetrators, and I think including himself, of accountability, responsibility, and it tells survivors and victims that if you still feel hurt, you're not evolved enough, you're not powerful. And that's spiritual gaslighting. It is weaponizing consciousness, language to shame pain. The next piece, and he'll be going into this a bit more in a moment, I'll let you hear what he has to say, but Marc glorifies betrayal and pushing boundaries and breaking boundaries. He says heartbreak makes you whole, and to me that's not wisdom. That is Sabbatean inversion, harm reframed as holy and beneficial. And we are going to talk about this in a moment. So Marc has built an entire philosophy that he calls cosmo-erotic humanism. He stitches together Judaism, the Kabbalah, Tantra, esoteric philosophy, the Solomon lineage teachings, and he puts himself at the center as a world teacher. He even says and claims that he is the reincarnation of Sabbatai Zevi. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but Sabbatai or Sabbatai Zevi followers believed in inversion, redemption through sin, breaking taboos, betraying trust, crossing boundaries, and they were manipulated by this false messiah, Sabbatai Zevi, to call that beneficial and holy, and that when you break boundaries, when you break people, that it opens up evolution, it opens up enlightenment, it opens up growth. And Marc places himself within that lineage, and Aubrey places himself within the King Solomon lineage. And so there's a connection there. And like many before Marc, he is using spirituality to cloak power and harm, like imbalanced power dynamics and harm. So let's listen to what Marc has to say about who he believes he is and what his purpose is in the world.
Right. And then he says to me, I just listen to this, he says, and we start talking, and this conversation develops, he says, and you're the reincarnation of Sabbatai Zevi. And I'm like, really, what the fuck? Why is an Inca shaman in fucking Prague and Poland telling me, right, that I'm the reincarnation of Sabbatai Zevi? And it's like, so this conversation continues. Then he goes to Sabbatai Zevi's grave, right, to bring me back an energetic blessing. And the story goes on and on, right? I'll hold the story now, but I'll just give you just one more thing, just to establish this is a little thing that I don't really share with people, but if you open up A Return to Eros, right? This is the book I wrote with Christina Kincaid, right? So it opens and it says, I come to speak dangerous words. I ask only that you listen dangerously, Chung Sa. And then, of course, there's Bob Dylan, but to live outside the law, you've got to be honest, right? But then, on the next page, right, the key page is, and I'll just show it here, if you can see it.
Yeah.
It says to Sabbatai and Sarah. So the book is dedicated to Sabbatai and to Sarah.
So Marc is saying that an Inca shaman told him that he is the reincarnation of Sabbatai Zevi, and that this Inca shaman went to Sabbatai Zevi's grave to retrieve an energetic blessing for Marc, and Marc dedicated his book partly to Sabbatai Zevi. So let's carry on listening to what Marc has to say.
It's not that the masses were just following him, but actually the most profound minds, right, of the day, the most sophisticated, right, unimaginable, towering, right, personas of enlightenment and intellect and what I would call eros, right, the great masters of their day who would make any of the geniuses of today, right, appear like kindergartners, right, he swept them. In other words, he wasn't just sweeping the masses, he actually swept this enormous array of some of the greatest giant intellect, mind, hearts, greatest, rishi, seer, masters that ever lived are actually taken by him and actually, as you say, are utterly convinced that he is the Messiah, son of David. So in other words, something was happening here. And he had a prophet, they called him the prophet, which was Nathan of Azza, Nathan Ha'azati, Nathan from Azza, was an unimaginably subtle, sophisticated, gorgeous thinker. And this great and wild, right, sweep that Sabbatai is doing amongst the greatest masters of the age are with their knowledge of his breaking of sexual boundaries. So we have to understand, he's operating within the classical Orthodox community, because there is no other community, right, in which the law is everything, and he is sweeping major Kabbalistic masters, Jonathan Eibschitz, for example, one of the most unimaginable masters of his day, completely swept up by Sabbatai Zevi, but the list is long.
So he's speaking about Sabbatai Zevi duping everybody, because Sabbatai Zevi was a false messiah in the Jewish religion, and everybody believed in him and turned to him, and it was really hard times. And so this dude comes along claiming to be the son of David. I don't know much about Jewish religion. I don't know much about religion, to be honest, but this dude comes along claiming to be the son of David. He is a false messiah, and he is teaching inversion practices, distortion of the Kabbalah. He gets people, the public, and people who are intelligent in positions of power, who are revered as, decent human beings, scholars, intelligent thinkers of the time. He gets people to believe in his beliefs and his agenda, and he starts twisting things and teaching people to commit awful, disgusting sexual acts that he calls breaking sexual boundaries. And Marc will be going into what those things are in a moment. This is who Sabbatai Zevi was. He was somebody who believed in breaking sexual boundaries, breaking vessels, breaking human beings in order to evolve and grow, because this man was mentally disturbed. And Marc Gafni believes he is the reincarnation of Sabbatai Zevi, and he is here to continue his work because he believes there's a lot of truth and a lot of goodness in his work, even though some of it was horrific. But based on what we know of Marc and his mentality and the way he thinks and how manipulative he is and the things he has done and his mindset around that, we know that he is trying to dupe people and sweep people and get people in so that he can twist spiritual truths, so that he can manipulate, so that he can get people to do these breakings of boundaries, especially sexual boundaries.
So what's happening here? And now just go with me just one more step. So Shalom is fascinated by Sabbatai Zevi, and then Shalom basically takes all of Jewish Kabbalistic scholarship, this huge enterprise, which is central to the cultural enterprise of the state of Israel. You know, the leading Kabbalah scholar in America is, I won't say his name because we're going to hold mystery and privacy there, but he's a close friend who was just in my house for several days, right? One of the people, I think, Kathy, who's here on the broadcast was up there with me and James, and we were talking about this, and he, of course, you know, he doesn't associate with me publicly, but he comes to visit me and study, right? So that's a different conversation, right? And bless him, and he's a good man, right? But literally the entire enterprise of Kabbalah scholarship in the last 60, 70 years, post Shalom's book, is obsessed with Sabbatai Zevi. In other words, there's more scholarship, right? And fascination, the word fascination is a great word, right? Fascination is a form of love. It means I'm compelled, I'm allured, right? I'm engaged with Sabbatai Zevi. So Sabbatai Zevi becomes this radically central character at the heart of what I would say is the cultural enterprise of Kabbalah scholarship, even as he sweeps the major masters, and yet he's demonized kind of in the standard narrative. That's just kind of who we're talking about. I just want to get a sense of who we're talking about. So with Sabbatai focuses on the sexual dimension. That's his way in, and not just Sabbatai. For most people, their way into the first fragrance of this field of Eros is through the sexual, which is why the sexual is so critical for people. And one of the things that we need to do is realize that the sexual models the erotic. It doesn't exhaust the erotic, right? That it's actually about fucking open reality in every dimension of life and not exiling the erotic into the sexual. And in some sense, I mean, I shouldn't say this. So I'm not going to say what I'm about to say, but in some sense, my interior self-experience is that something of Sabbatai's soul spark, right, entered me. And that's how we understand reincarnation. And that I'm trying to complete his work, right? And it's that actually he seeded the world with certain key ideas, but they were complete, and they were somewhat bipolar. So almost not all wrong. And we need to actually liberate those sparks and actually articulate this in a way where we can actually generate, right, a grounded culture of Eros.
Personally, I don't want Marc Gafni's version of a quote-unquote grounded culture of Eros. And who is this famous Kabbalah scholar that is going to study with Marc Gafni secretly? Who is this person? And when we know that Marc Gafni believes that he is the reincarnation of Sabbatai Zevi, who did all these horrific things and duped everybody, are people not realizing that that is what Marc Gafni is doing? Yeah, this is crazy to me.
You know, what did he actually stand for? Like, who was he? So the first thing he stands for, we're talking about this liberation of the feminine. So in Lurianic Kabbalah, which is so crazy gorgeous, right? And so subtle and so hard to read, right? Anyone who read integral theory is like the easiest thing to read compared to Lurianic Kabbalah. It's a very subtle, complex, and so in Lurianic Kabbalah, there's a hidden, well, not hidden if you're not reading carefully. Once you read carefully, it's very clear, called Aliyata Nukva, the ascension of the feminine.
And the ascension of the feminine is about fixing the degradation of the feminine, which Luria locates in the moment in which the sun and the moon in the original creation story are supposed to be equal lights. And then, so in the text, you see there's sun and moon. And then there's some moment in which the sun clearly becomes dominant and the moon becomes in devotion to the sun, but the moon loses its power. That appears in the Genesis text if you read it carefully. The sun is understood as the masculine, in mythic terms, the moon, the feminine. And this prioritizing at a certain moment in history of the masculine, although perhaps necessary, right, is viewed by Luria as something like what modern feminism calls patriarchy. It's viewed by Luria as an utter violation of the nature of reality. And so therefore, what needs to happen is the masculine and the feminine are actually, they need to turn away from each other. They need to individuate. And Luria describes 7 stages of Aliyat Nukva, of the ascension of the feminine. And in I have a volume called The Radical Kabbalah, in volume 2, which is about the wisdom of Solomon. If you look at the index, I go through the original Lurianic sources and the Zohar sources, the Aramaic sources about this notion, right? The emergence of the feminine. But for Luria, that's a theoretical, mystical, right, interior process. Sabbatai says no. Sabbatai says, let's make this real. Right? The feminine needs to claim her fullness. Now, that's part 1, but here it gets crazy, and then turn back to, here's part 2. It gets completely crazy, Andrew. And part of the fullness of the feminine is the fullness of her fuck, the fullness of her eros, right? And Luria actually works very hard to actually say that Lilith, who is the she-demon, because she's lost this radical sexuality. If you read Luria carefully, which I did with an old friend of mine, and we published a Hebrew book that we're now about to republish on 2,000 years of text about Lilith, right? Luria reclaims Lilith into the precincts of the sacred and says that Lilith actually, this she-demon Lilith is actually the first Eve. The second Eve is the kind of, expression of the feminine through the eyes of patriarchy, but Lilith is the full power of the radicalized, erotic feminine, which the church also recognized, which is why, but the church demonized, right, feminine desire. The church says feminine desire is insatiable and wild and way beyond any kind of dimension of masculine desire. And my old colleague David Data, right? David writes about this a lot, right? The kind of the radical, gorgeous nature of feminine desire that far exceeds masculine desire. The church demonizes it. Luria reclaims the feminine and says, no, Lilith, radical feminine desire needs to be in the precincts of the sacred. And then Sabbatai turns to the feminine and to the masculine, but to the feminine to lead, and says to the feminine, right, live the fullness of your desire and reclaim its utter purity. Mm-hmm. Whoa, right? Like, whoa. We're there in the 7th century. And he does this, Andrew, through radical acts of boundary breaking, which I won't go into now, but they're radical boundary breaking acts. But that's his second move. Sabbatai was a broken figure. He was filled with brokenness, right? And we're all filled with the holy and broken, hallelujah, but Sabbatai was not a figure to be imitated. Sabbatai was not a clean, pure teacher, right? And now every clean, pure teacher has faults and flaws. We're all imperfect vessels for the light. But Sabbatai was more than that. Sabbatai was actually wildly expansive and then wildly broken. He would both close and then open. But actually, when he goes to the Sultan, right, the meeting doesn't go well because actually he's in a madly depressed state when he goes, and he's not in an open state. One of the reasons the meeting doesn't go well. So Sabbatai is not a figure to be emulated, and Sabbatai is basically having women sleep with their brothers, right? He's having, women sleep with their sons, right? In other words, he's breaking every boundary, right, in the most radical way. So clearly, right, neither I or Bonnie, right, are on board with that kind of radical boundary breaking. What we are on board with I think, and I can't speak for Bonnie, but we are on board with the reclaiming of what we might call the purity of fuck, the goodness of Eros, right? The realization that the tumescence of the feminine and the throbbing of the masculine, right, is actually an expression of the cosmoerotic universe in person, awake and alive in me, which is utter purity, right? The purity of that, the goodness of that. So Sabbatai, in this radical anarchic way, breaks every vessel, right, without any containment in order to point towards that truth. And vessels shatter and enormous suffering is caused, and yet it opens something up. So he's one of those figures, right, who was in some sense a messianic figure, and that he changed, but not a messianic figure in the sense that he was perfect or that he got everything right, that he actually changed the course of human spiritual history. So in other words, the temple, right, actually was an expression of this sense of the purity of the radical aliveness, not of sexing, but of the fuck of cosmos, of the eros of cosmos, which in one expression incarnates in our body. And what Sabbatai is saying is, although he goes too far because he's breaking all the vessels, but what he gets right at the core is I've got to be able to trust my body. And it's if I can't trust that the surging force of Eros in my body, when it's clarified, not its pseudo form, not in its sloppy form, but the clarified Eros in my body, if I can't trust the goodness of that, then I'm lost in shame.
What he's speaking about here is really interesting because he is basically saying that we can trust our desires, we can trust our body and our God-given desires, whether that is whatever the desires are, but he is referring to sexual desire. He's referring to eros, right? And this could be really dangerous because even though he's saying when it's clarified, I don't know exactly what he means by that. Clarified desire, clarified eros. Somebody could think that their desire is clarified and it's very much harmful and very much not clarified and really wounded and toxic and disturbing and perverted, right? And the gist of what he's saying here is that you can always trust your desire, when he's talking about sexual desire and eros, I'm assuming within that he's meaning his arousal, his sexual desire, as well as your creative life force energy, your desire for things, to do things in the world, your ambitions, your whatever. But I do sense that he is speaking mostly about sexual desire here because, yeah, that's what he's been speaking about. And he speaks about, it's interesting because he speaks about the liberation of the feminine and the wild feminine desire, and he speaks about not shaming the masculine sexual desire. And he's basically saying here, if you can't trust your body's desires, your eros, your surging sexual energy, I'm assuming he means your arousal responses. If you can't trust those, then you are in shame, then you are living in shame. And this to me is another manipulation, another inversion, another distortion, because there is something called arousal discordance. There is unwanted arousal, there is harmful arousal, and sexual desire. So there is harmful sexual desire in this world. And if you're trusting your desire to do harmful things, then obviously this is really not beneficial. And it's a little bit scary when he's speaking about breaking boundaries and breaking vessels and breaking people open to growth and evolution and enlightenment and things like that through the sexual breaking of sexual boundaries. It sounds like he kind of condones that. And so how far are we taking it? He obviously doesn't demonize Jeffrey Epstein. So how far are we taking this? Where do you draw the line? What is considered clarified according to Marc Gafni? What is a clarified sexual desire? What is clarified eros? Okay, I don't know. But it sounds a bit dodgy to me, what he's saying. And it's also like, yeah, of course, we don't want to shame our sexuality. We don't want to live in shame. We are sexual beings. There's no shame in that. There's no shame in sexual desire. But you need to be able to be very intelligent with your sexual desire. You need to be highly sexually conscious. You need to be emotionally mature, mentally mature. You need to have sexual, emotional, and mental maturity. And you can't just go and act on all your sexual urges, your sexual desires, your eros. You can't just go and act on that. And you can't always trust that because it's not always beneficial. I like to speak about your quartet of yeses, which is your yoni, your gut, your heart, your mind. So your sexual center, your gut, your heart, your mind. You need to have all of these in alignment and to be like full body, full consensual yes to something. And this really plays into something called arousal discordance. This really is a different video that I'm going to do about arousal discordance because it's very complex. Arousal is very complex, and it seems like Marc Gafni actually doesn't understand the complexity of arousal. And what he's trying to say is you can trust your arousal, you can trust your sexual desire, you can trust your eros, because if you don't trust that, then you are in shame. But there's so many layers to this. If your sexual desire is leading you down a path of being coercive, manipulative, grooming, and abuse, if it's leading you down that path of manipulating somebody into being sexual with you, or to, in the case of Aubrey Marcus, opening the relationship to be polyamorous, betraying his wife, if your sexual desire is leading you to abuse your position of authority and power, if it is leading you down a path of inappropriate sexual behavior and sexual abuse, then obviously this is harmful, this isn't good, this isn't beneficial, this is a wound and a shadow that requires healing and integration. And unfortunately, what I'm sensing here with Marc is that he's speaking about these things to absolve himself from his wrongdoing again, to make it okay what he has chosen sexually, the things he has done, to alleviate himself from any shame or guilt, which I don't think he would feel particularly anyway because of his personality type. I don't think he feels shame, guilt, remorse. I don't think he really understands those things. And so ordinarily, I would agree, like, let's not shame our sexuality. Let's listen to our eros. Let's have a conversation with our bodies, our desires. Let's really look at that. Let's work with any wounds. Let's clarify that. Yes, agreeing with him. But when it's coming from him, with his past and who he is and the things he believes, there's something being twisted here. I don't understand it fully, but I can sense a manipulation happening that is effectively making it, there's something in here that I sense he is basically saying it's okay to trust all of your sexual desires, because otherwise you live in shame. And there is a place for shame, and victims do not need to feel any shame. It's not their shame. But perpetrators, potential perpetrators, offenders, there is a place for shame. It is a navigation system. It helps you to navigate what is in alignment, what is in integrity, what is right and wrong, what is beneficial and not beneficial, what is light or dark. Having shame is a navigation tool. It can really help you to live in alignment with your highest nature, with your ethics, with compassion, with empathy for others. Without shame, without that emotion and that feeling of shame, you wouldn't know something was out of alignment. So if you're feeling shame for a sexual desire that is harmful, then that is appropriate. To have that emotion of shame, that is appropriate. You can then work with that and you can heal the wound and then therefore heal the shame. Like, it's not always a negative thing. And so him speaking about, if you don't trust your sexual desires, if you don't trust your eros, if you don't trust your desire, then you are in shame, then you are living in shame. It's so much more complex than what he is even saying. Yet he speaks about all the complexities and how deep everything is, but he doesn't understand the complexities and the depth of things. It's very surface level, and because of that, I'm sensing manipulation again.
Right? Because I'm trying to be this good social person. I'm trying to be this good obedient person, this good religious person. And I've got this surging force of eros that moves, that demands, that allures me. That's this raging, pulsing desire. Like, so if I can't actually recognize that desire is the nature of cosmos, desire is the nature of she, and that desire lives uniquely as me, and that to be a unique self is to be a unique configuration of desire. And I can't actually live that desire in my body according to and in accordance with my own unique script of desire. Right? If I can't access my unique script of desire, my unique scripts of desire either hijacked or demonized and degraded by the churches, the old lineages, or the new pornographic lineages, which tell me what I should desire. If I can't access that desire, then I can't trust myself. That's what we're saying. So Sabbatai, he goes too far. He breaks all the vessels. Breaks all the vessels. And I want to be really clear about that, right? In other words, right? And he's pointing towards them.
Okay, so listening to him speak about this, there's some things in there that seem empowering, right? About the liberation of the feminine, the eros, and to not shame our sexuality, our wild feminine nature. It sounds like it's sort of anti-patriarchy and in favor of the feminine. But then the way of going about these things is breaking the feminine, abusing the feminine, and manipulating and bypassing and getting women to cross their own boundaries, to break them. This seems to be something that people could see within Aubrey Marcus and Vailana and Alana's dynamic. It's this, it's actually the ultimate of misogyny. But it is disguised under feminine liberation. And it's just that age old, isn't it? Of it's clearly misogynistic, yet it is disguised as female empowerment. And this is a theme that is running in society. This took me down some rabbit holes, I'm not going to lie, because I'm like, I don't know anything about like Jewish religion. I didn't even know what Sabbatean meant, or Frankist, is it? Frankist. I had no idea. But it was really interesting to me because, you know, people, I'm just going to read what I put here. People ask if there's one big secret cabal running the world. It seems like powerful, wealthy, sociopathic, narcissistic, or psychopathic people tend to find each other, right? They form alliances when it suits them and they compete when it doesn't. And they'll use any belief system, any religion, any group, any symbol, any ritual to justify themselves, whether that is Sabbatean, whether that is Satanism, whether that is Freemasonry, whether that is Illuminati, whatever all of that is. They utilize these belief systems so that they can perpetrate so that they can get into positions of power and influence, control. And that's why you can often see the same symbolism. But I think that a lot of these people don't really, they don't necessarily really believe in those things that they're practicing. It's just a way for them to get away with or justify their sick perversions, and to be able to blackmail other people, to, you know, get into positions of power, authority, control, money. It's basically messed up people using the cloak of religion, spirituality, elite networks to do messed up things. And maybe some of them believe in what they're doing and they truly believe in these concepts and belief systems, and maybe they are true. I don't know. Maybe they believe in those things, maybe they don't. I have no idea. We only know like a tiny percentage of reality. We don't actually know the whole truth about things, but some of these people may really, really believe in the concepts and belief systems that they are in. Some people are indoctrinated into it, some people find their way into it, some people use it just as a way to offend. And for me, it's really about the abuse of innocence, the abuse of sexual energy, the harnessing of sexual energy. And it seems to me that Marc is kind of spiritualizing this abuse, and he turns the theft of innocence, the theft of sexual energy, the theft of someone's power into a path of evolution. And that is not sacred sexuality. That's not true power. That's not true empowerment. That is false power. And that is just entitlement, fluffed up and dressed up as spiritual awakening and evolution and enlightenment, and that's not what it is. Like I said, Marc has been whispering in Aubrey's ear. Aubrey talks about being part of King Solomon's lineage and the esoteric wisdom. He's fascinated with all of that, and that makes him very vulnerable to Marc's flattery, to his manipulation. And Marc plays into Aubrey's wounds and egos and his stallion eros, right? And he's encouraging betrayal, and he is encouraging breaking the feminine. He is encouraging sacrifice, the feminine having to sacrifice. He's encouraging those parts of growth, even though Aubrey is not particularly growing through that. And Aubrey amplifies this to his audience, spreading Marc's inversion and distortion and manipulation further into the sacred sexuality space, the space of divine partnership and Tantra. This is why I'm speaking about this, because this is not Tantra, this is not divine union, this is not sacred sexuality, this is BS. This is somebody who is very twisted teaching these things. This isn't even about Tantra, this isn't about Judaism or any other religion. These religions are just vehicles, and the real pattern is disturbed individuals using spirituality to justify betrayal, control, abuse, whether that is called Sabbatean, whether that is called satanic, whether that is called Masonic or just elite. The heart of it is the same. It is the abuse of innocence, the abuse of the vulnerable, the sacrifice of the vulnerable, and the abuse of power. When this betrayal is glorified and when abusers are excused, when victims are told to never walk away, that's not Tantra, that's not spirituality, that is abuse. That is abusive, disguised as wisdom. True spirituality doesn't blur the line between love and violation. It makes that line crystal clear. And to survivors, there is no shame in having been a victim. The word victim isn't shameful or bad or a dirty word. Like, not at all. You are not defined by what was done to you. You were a victim in that moment. There's nothing shameful about that. The shame is on the perpetrator. The shame is on the offender. The shame is on the person who victimized you. It is not your shame to carry. That's my take on Marc Gafni and his Tantra video and his thoughts on Jeffrey Epstein and his Sabbatean roots. I think he's nuts. I think he has got a bit of a screw loose, and I think he needs to check himself, because the things that he's saying, it's bizarre. It is bizarre. It's like he is trying to justify his abusive nature through his teachings and absolve himself from his past. That's what I see happening. And he is continually playing the victim by victim blaming and shaming. It's like he's talking to the people he has harmed through his teachings, as well as talking to the new people coming into his teachings so he can manipulate them into his way of thinking to spread this really destructive message. To me, it sounds like he has seen all the videos about him, and through his teachings, he is teaching these things, but actually responding to the people that have been making videos about him, his previous victims, people who have known him, people who have spoken out about him, my videos as well. It feels like he's watched all of these things and he's answering through his teachings. And it's bizarre. It's really bizarre. But this is obviously what he believes. There's a lot of people, especially men, I will say, that do think along the lines of him, and they will latch on to things so that they can get away with doing things that are harming other people and thinking that that's a good thing. If you are somebody who has gotten involved in these kind of philosophies and teachings, this twisted spirituality, I just want you to know, like, you can get out of it. And yeah, this is kind of cultish in my opinion, and you can get out of it. And if Aubrey or Vailana, if you're watching this, I really do hope that you're able to see Marc for who he is and not buy into what he's saying, because what he's saying is really twisted and manipulative and effed up, and it is not beneficial. It's not about true divine union. It's not evolution. This isn't enlightenment. This isn't true growth. This is, this is really scary. I do believe, now, and I've probably said this before, but I do believe that this is going to be my last video about Marc Gafni. I don't know for sure, but I'm going to put it out there that I don't really want to speak about him anymore, because he gives me the ick, he gives me the creeps. I don't want to hear his voice anymore. It's taken me a long time to do this video, and it's still really poor quality, and I'm so sorry about that. But yeah, I'm just like, okay, this dude is weird. I can completely understand, like, it's so understandable how people could get involved with him and buy into what he's saying. He is very sneaky, and the way that he manipulates and, like, oh yeah, like what he's saying, even the top minds, even really intelligent people, like deep thinking, caring, kind, compassionate, intelligent people can get sucked into people like Marc Gafni. He's not going to change. He's clearly the one projecting all of this, like, quite clearly. This is all a projection from him. He knows that he has coerced girls and women. He knows that he has been sexually inappropriate. He knows that he has betrayed people. He knows that he used the feminine. He knows that, surely he knows that what he's talking about. It just blows my mind to think that he would actually believe what he's saying, or that he's that deluded. I get a sneaky feeling he's not, and that this is just a way for him to be able to, I think he gets a kick out of this because he can't really perpetrate now, because he's been involved with the police and had 2 misdemeanors, and, you know, he'll go to jail if he does anything physically himself now. And so I think he gets a kick out of teaching this stuff to try and twist other people and twist their relationships, and he gets a kick out of seeing things unfold, and he gets a kick out of people following his advice and his ways. So that's what I see. I think he's quite the sick individual, and I do believe that true justice is in healing, and I want healing for him. I have compassion and understanding of why people are like that. I don't know his personal reasons why he's like that, but I know it doesn't just come from nowhere. It's very rarely just nature, unless someone's born with like messed up brain chemistry. There's obviously reasons why people are the way they are, but that doesn't mean I'm not going to have boundaries, okay? That doesn't mean I'm just going to condone it and bypass it and just be like, oh, okay, poor you. So that's it. That is it. I'm going to go now. Please let me know in the comments down below, what do you know about Sabbatean, Frankist Judaism? What do you know? Do you think that other people in positions of authority or in the elite or power are practicing this kind of thing? Or do you think it's all satanic? Or do you think it's nothing to do with any kind of belief systems? Really, it's just messed up people doing messed up things and helping each other to do that, and then blackmailing each other and competing with each other, but then collaborating at other times. Like, yeah. And how can we find solutions for this? I think speaking about it is a really good way, pointing it out when we find somebody like that and be like, hey, just calling this out, this isn't quite okay. I think it's okay to do that. I think it's important to do that. I would want to be called out. So if I ever am doing something that is out of integrity, out of alignment, not ethical, if I'm being a total douchebag, please demonize me. Demonize me, call me out, tell me, share with me about it, make videos about it. I want to know if I'm being a douchebag. Like, I don't have an issue with that. I'd rather know. Like, I probably have been a douchebag, and I probably will be a douchebag, but I try my best not to be, okay? Like, I really do try my best not to be a douchebag. And if I was being a douchebag and everyone was telling me I was being a douchebag, I would take note of that and try and be very self-reflective and not just assume everyone's projecting their shadow onto me. It's always this and, okay, yeah, everybody has their projections, everybody has their shadows, but it's not ever just that, is it? So yeah, let me know in the comments your thoughts about this. Let me know. This video hasn't been very good, I don't feel, because there's part of me kind of not wanting to do it, and I just didn't really want to hear his voice anymore. Like, it just gives me the heebie-jeebies, you know? But I know it's important that I do share these things, and it's related to things that I teach and that I do, and I feel like I do need to be the voice of reason on this. And also, I know what it's like to be in situations with people like that who are manipulative, narcissistic, sociopathic, coercive. I've been in situations myself. I've experienced sexual abuse, child sexual abuse myself. And it's really, I just feel compelled and called to talk about these topics. And I know that there's women and people out there who have been a victim of Marc, and I know that it can be helpful to hear other people saying, like, it's not your fault, and you don't have to speak to him. Don't let this man manipulate you anymore. Take your power back, have boundaries. Like, you're amazing. I admire you for coming out the other side of that. And no, you don't have to go through these kind of things to grow. That's not the only way of growth and evolution. You don't actually have to forgive anybody if you don't want to. Like, yeah, I said about this in my previous video, like, you don't have to forgive someone. I really hate this narrative around forgiveness. Like, yes, you can forgive and you can have compassion and understanding. You can have compassion and understanding without forgiving somebody's choices and actions. Like, you don't have to forgive. You can still, like, you can forgive and obviously not condone. Like, there's so many layers to it, and you can't fool yourself into believing you've forgiven someone when you haven't. It can take time, and you don't necessarily have to. Anyway, I'm going to go now. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it if you got to the end of this really super long video. Please let me know in the comments your thoughts about everything that I shared here, about what Marc has said, about your thoughts about Aubrey Marcus, and yeah, what your thoughts are about all of this, because, you know, I do feel like a huge light is being shone on the shadows in society right now. It's like lots is coming to light, and I feel like this is part of that. It's part of that conversation. So yeah, thank you for watching. Thank you for being here. I really do appreciate you so much. I'm going to go now, so I am wishing you an amazing day, and as always, remember to keep it juicy.